She took over my garage before sunrise, then tried to fine me for what she called illegal business activity on my own property. The funny part was those trucks she parked in there were blocking a space I had legally leased to the county sheriff. And by the time she realized that, she had already handed me the first piece of evidence I would use to ruin her whole little empire. My name is Calvin Brooks. I am 54 years old. And for most of my life, I believe that if you kept your head down, paid your bills, waved at your neighbors, and minded your own business, people would mostly leave you alone. That was before Marlene Whitaker moved into Briar Glen, Georgia, with 2 oversized landscaping trucks, a pearl white SUV, and the kind of smile people wear when they're already deciding what they're going to take from you. I live in a small brick ranch house at the end of Dogwood Lane. Nothing fancy, just an old corner lot with a detached garage my father built back in the 80s, back when a man could still build something with his hands and not need 3 committees to approve the color of the nails. After my wife Ellen passed from ovarian cancer, that garage became more than a building. It was where I kept her gardening tools, my old workbench, the smell of motor oil and sawdust, and eventually the one thing that helped me keep the lights on. The county marshal's office needed secure storage for emergency equipment, and my garage was perfect, solid doors, separate access, quiet street, no drama. They paid me $600 a month, which may not sound like much to some folks, but when you're living on disability checks and a pension thin enough to see daylight through, $600 is the difference between staying in your home and packing your memories into cardboard boxes. Deputy Nolan Price came by twice a week, always polite, always on time, always careful not to disturb anything. Then Marlene arrived and decided Briar Glen was not a neighborhood anymore. It was her personal kingdom. Within 10 days, she was on the HOA board. Within 2 weeks, she was measuring people's lawns from the sidewalk. And by the end of the month, she had started saying things like community standards in that sharp little voice that made you want to check whether your mailbox was standing too crooked. Her problem with me started at her first big backyard party. I woke up that Saturday to find 2 diesel trucks parked halfway into my driveway, both of them angled like they owned the place, engines still ticking, leaking oil onto the concrete apron outside my garage. I walked over, knocked on her gate, and said, "Marlene, I need those trucks moved. Deputy Price is scheduled here this afternoon." She looked at me over her sunglasses like I was a waiter who had brought the wrong salad. "Calvin, relax," she said. "It is just overflow parking. Do not be so territorial." I told her it was private property. She smiled and said, "Well, maybe private property should still follow neighborhood rules." That was the first time I understood this was not about parking. It was about power. And Marlene had made one mistake right out of the gate. She thought I was just a lonely widower with bad knees and no fight left in me. She did not know Ellen had taught me 2 things before she died: keep every document and never let a bully think silence means surrender. 3 days later, the official letter showed up in my mailbox inside one of those thick white envelopes designed to make your stomach drop before you even open them. Briar Glen Homeowners Association. Formal notice of violation. I could already hear Marlene's voice before I unfolded the paper. Unauthorized commercial activity. Threat to neighborhood character. Potential fines beginning at $2,500. I actually laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurdly calculated. She had parked her own trucks in my garage entrance, then filed a complaint claiming my property was being used for commercial operations. That kind of arrogance almost deserves applause. Rex, my German Shepherd, sat beside me on the porch watching while I reread the notice 3 times. Dogs can smell tension before people do. He kept staring toward Marlene's house like he already knew trouble was coming. And honestly, it was. That same afternoon, I noticed her standing at the edge of my property, taking pictures with her phone. Not casual neighborhood pictures either. She was zooming in on the garage doors, the Marshall equipment cases, even my utility meter. I walked outside and asked her what exactly she was doing. She lowered the phone slowly and smiled without warmth. "Just documenting changes to the neighborhood, Calvin. HOA responsibility. Funny thing about people who love authority, they always say the ugliest things with the calmest voice. I spent the next morning downtown at the county records office digging through old property files while the clerk, an older woman named Dorothy, helped me pull original zoning documents from the late 80s. The room smelled like old paper and stale air conditioning, the kind of place where secrets quietly survive for decades. About 20 minutes in, Dorothy adjusted her glasses and looked over the file. "Honey, your garage predates the HOA by nearly 16 years. I asked her what that meant exactly. She leaned back in her chair and grinned. Means those folks can complain all they want, but they cannot rewrite history. Structures and uses that existed before the HOA are protected. Grandfathered rights. Suddenly Ellen's voice echoed in my head. Keep every document. I swear, sometimes it still felt like she was coaching me from somewhere just outside the room. But that was not even the best part. While searching county permit records, I discovered something else. Marlene's landscaping trucks were both registered as heavy commercial vehicles, well above the residential overnight parking limit for Briar Glen. And not only did she not have permits, she had been operating her business directly from her house. Client meetings, equipment storage, employee scheduling, all things explicitly prohibited under the same HOA bylaws she was using against me. That Tuesday night, the HOA board meeting looked less like local government and more like amateur theater. Marlene sat in the center, wearing a navy blazer like she was about to prosecute a murder case. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, while neighbors filled cheap, folding chairs around the room. I could smell burnt coffee and somebody's cinnamon gum. "Calvin Brooks," she began, "your ongoing commercial arrangement is negatively impacting property values and violating Section 4B of Briar Glen residential standards." She slid printed photos across the table dramatically, pictures of Deputy Price unloading emergency cases from my garage. One of the newer board members shook his head like he was already convinced. Then Marlene smiled at me. That was her mistake. People smile like that when they think the story is already over. I stood up slowly and slid my own folder onto the table. Original county deed records, construction permits, zoning exemptions, grandfather protections. The whole room went quiet except for paper shuffling. Harold Jenkins, one of the older residents who had lived there longer than anybody, picked up the documents and started chuckling under his breath. "Well, hell," he muttered. "Calvin's garage was here before half this neighborhood existed." Marlene's face tightened immediately. "Those protections are outdated," she snapped. "Current standards supersede older uses." "That is interesting," I said calmly, "because current standards also prohibit commercial vehicles exceeding 10,000 pounds from overnight residential parking without permit authorization." Then I laid down photos of both her landscaping trucks parked outside her home for the last 4 months. Date stamps, registration weights, county code references, everything. Harold nearly slapped the table laughing. "Lord have mercy, Marlene," he wheezed. "You done built your own trap." Her expression changed so fast it almost gave me whiplash. First anger, then embarrassment, then pure hatred. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. One board member started asking questions about our business permits. Another asked why enforcement complaints only seemed to target longtime residents. Marlene tried regaining control, but once people smell hypocrisy, they never stop digging. The HOA voted 4-1 to dismiss all violations against me pending further review. And before the meeting ended, Marlene herself received an official notice regarding illegal commercial vehicle storage. Watching her gather her papers afterward was honestly fascinating. She moved like somebody trying to keep dignity from spilling onto the floor. But as I walked outside that night, I noticed something through her kitchen window. She was pacing back and forth with a phone pressed to her ear, furious, animated, pointing toward my house while speaking to somebody I could not hear. That was the moment I realized winning the meeting had not ended anything. It had embarrassed her publicly. And people like Marlene do not forgive humiliation. They escalate. Sure enough, the next morning my mailbox was blocked by one of her trucks. By lunchtime, animal control showed up because somebody filed a complaint claiming Rex was aggressive toward children. By Wednesday, city planning mailed me notice of an investigation into unauthorized mixed-use property operations. Every complaint anonymous. Every complaint perfectly timed. Every complaint clearly her. And the worst part was, it started working. One night, I sat alone in Ellen's old gardening room, staring at unpaid bills spread across the table while Rex slept beside my chair. The house felt painfully quiet. I remember thinking how easy it would be to give up, sell the property, walk away, let somebody else deal with people like Marlene. Then I looked over at Ellen's photograph sitting beside the window. She was smiling in that picture, dirt on her gloves, hair blowing across her face while she stood in the rose garden she loved so much. And I suddenly realized something that hit me right in the chest. Marlene was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to exhaust me. Mentally, financially, emotionally. She wanted me tired enough to surrender voluntarily. And once I understood that, something inside me changed. Because there is a dangerous moment in every quiet man's life when he stops hoping for peace and starts preparing for war. The first thing I did was stop reacting emotionally. That probably sounds simple, but it is hard to explain how dangerous anger becomes when somebody is deliberately trying to bait you into losing control. Marlene wanted a scene. She wanted me yelling in the street so she could point at the angry widower next door and say, "See? I told everyone he was unstable." So instead, I got organized. Every complaint, every photo, every city notice, every late-night truck movement, every security camera timestamp from neighbors who had quietly started siding with me. I documented all of it. And once other people started comparing notes, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Turns out I was not the only target. Mrs. Holloway down the street had been cited for an oversized bird feeder after living there peacefully for 19 years. The Alvarez family got threatened over a work van parked in their driveway. An elderly veteran named Mr. Dawson suddenly received surprise inspections about his fence height after refusing to sell his property to a developer 6 months earlier. Funny coincidence, right? Except it was not coincidence at all. It was strategy. Marlene had been slowly pressuring long-time homeowners for months, especially older folks living on fixed incomes. She wanted people frustrated enough to move. And once enough houses flipped, developers could move in. Bigger homes. Bigger profits. Briar Glen was never her neighborhood. It was an investment project wearing suburban lipstick. The real break came from somebody I never expected. Her husband. Around 8:30 one night, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it and found Richard Whitaker standing there looking like a man who had not slept properly in weeks. Wrinkled work shirt, tired eyes, whiskey on his breath. Behind him, Marlene's kitchen lights glowed through the dark like a storm waiting to happen. He held out a manila folder without even making eye contact. "You did not get this from me," he muttered. Then he looked over his shoulder toward his own house and added quietly, "She is not going to stop, Calvin. Not unless somebody stops her first." Inside that folder were copies of emails between Marlene and a regional property investment group. Detailed discussions about increasing turnover rates in Briar Glen. Lists of residents categorized by age, financial vulnerability, and estimated relocation likelihood. My name was highlighted in yellow beside the words ideal acquisition lot due to corner access and detached structure potential. I just sat there staring at those pages while the refrigerator hummed in the background and Rex rested his head against my leg. It suddenly stopped feeling like neighborhood drama. It felt criminal. 2 days later, everything exploded. The town council held an emergency public meeting after the county fire department filed complaints about blocked emergency access routes near our subdivision. Turns out those construction barriers that mysteriously appeared near Dogwood Lane during a house fire response had been rented under one of Marlene's business accounts. That was the moment the story escaped HOA territory and became front-page news. By the time I arrived at City Hall that Tuesday night, local reporters were already outside interviewing residents. The council chamber was packed shoulder to shoulder. Some folks looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. Most just looked exhausted. Marlene arrived late wearing a cream-colored blazer and carrying herself with that same polished confidence she always used when cameras were nearby. But confidence looks different once fear starts leaking underneath it. Deputy Nolan Price sat beside me holding a thick evidence binder while city investigators organized documents near the front table. I remember looking around the room, thinking how strange it was that this entire mess started because somebody parked two trucks where they did not belong. Then the mayor opened the floor, and suddenly the whole illusion collapsed. Residents began standing one after another describing harassment, intimidation, false complaints, property targeting, selective enforcement. Mrs. Holloway cried halfway through her statement. Mr. Dawson slammed his cane against the floor while describing how city inspectors showed up 4 times in 2 weeks after refusing unsolicited buyout offers. The room kept getting louder. Then Deputy Price stood up and played the recording I had taken on my back porch 3 nights earlier. Marlene's voice filled the chamber crystal clear. $20,000 cash if I agreed to terminate the Marshall lease. Threats about permits, inspections, taxes, pressure from city connections if I refused. And finally, the line that sucked every ounce of oxygen from the room. I would hate for something unfortunate to happen to that dog of yours. You could hear people gasp. Even Marlene's attorney froze. Because there are some moments where everybody collectively realizes the same thing at once. And in that moment, everyone understood she was not just manipulative. She was dangerous. Marlene stood up immediately trying to shout over the audio, claiming it was edited, taken out of context, politically motivated, but panic ruins performance. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Then Richard stood up from the back row, quietly, slowly, and walked straight to the front carrying another folder. I will never forget the look on her face when she saw him. It was not anger. It was betrayal. He handed the documents to the mayor without saying a word. Internal emails, property targeting plans, communication with developers, financial projections tied to resident turnover. The whole room turned dead silent while council members flipped through pages. Finally, the county investigator closed the folder and looked directly at Marlene. Mrs. Whitaker, based on the evidence presented tonight, the county will be recommending formal charges related to extortion, fraud, harassment, and obstruction of emergency response operations. Marlene actually laughed at first. One sharp little laugh like her brain could not process reality fast enough. Then Deputy Price approached her table. "Ma'am, please stand up." And just like that, it was over. The woman who spent months trying to make everybody else feel powerless stood there trembling while cameras flashed around her. Nobody cheered. Honestly, that was the strangest part. The room did not feel victorious. It felt relieved, like people had finally exhaled after holding tension for too long. About 4 months later, Richard filed for divorce. The development deal collapsed. Several HOA board members resigned. Briar Glen eventually rewrote its bylaws limiting enforcement powers and requiring public transparency for all complaints. As for me, life got quieter again. Deputy Price expanded the lease agreement with the county. The extra income saved my house. Rex still sleeps beside the porch every evening while I drink coffee, where Ellen used to sit with her gardening gloves hanging from her back pocket. Sometimes new neighbors ask me if the stories about Marlene are true. I usually shrug and tell them neighborhoods are funny things. Most communities are not destroyed by loud people. They are destroyed when decent people get too tired to push back against them. But I will admit something honestly. Even now, part of me still wonders whether I should have taken the $20,000 and walked away before everything burned down around her. So tell me this. If somebody slowly tried to push you out of your own home, would you fight back like I did? Or would you have left while you still had peace? And to be honest, down in the comments, because after everything that happened in Briar Glen, I learned real quick that everybody loves justice until justice gets loud.